Thank you. The only thing I failed to preserve today was my voice, so thank you for bearing with me. So I would like to ask you to imagine. Imagine you were recognized by a name that was not your own. Imagine if your every conversation became a matter of historic knowledge. Imagine if your every action in the present was dictated by the life of a person from the past. These are unusual thoughts, I admit, but they are regular realities for me. You see, to some people, I am the outspoken abolitionist and early suffragette Lucy Stone, or the daring undercover journalist Nellie Bly. To others, I'm the pioneer and early Ohio settler Mary Gannot, and to still others, I'm Little House on the Prairie author Laura Ingalls Wilder. Such is the life of a historic reenactor, a role in which a simple "who are you" or "when's your birthday" must be answered with as much confidence as if it were truly my own name or date of birth. As a reenactor and aspiring historian, I can say with confidence that there is nothing inherently dull about history. Why then is it so often brushed aside as something dry or old-fashioned, something dripping with tedious timelines of date after date? History might seem abstract or unrelatable at times, but in reality, it is overflowing with life, alive in the past, present, and future alike. History is forever moving, forever teaching, forever growing. Often, however, we raise the cry that modern is safer, modern is happier, modern is more practical, without recognizing the lives and legacies we are leaving behind. What is history but the building blocks of modernity? If supporting contemporary culture entails destroying our remaining links to the past, then I can say with confidence that the history of today will not be the history of tomorrow. Historic preservation is essential, not to restrict us, but to free us, to help us understand the mistakes and lessons of the past and apply them in the present day. In an era when the veil of contemporary culture conceals countless stories of the past, preservation is a vital path to unlocking lives and legacies otherwise chained behind bars of apathy and excessive progress. Before diving too deeply into the heart of my topic, though, I want to recognize some background to historic preservation, the defining ideologies and such. The legislation promoting historic preservation, unfortunately, has a shorter history than that of the structures and stories it seeks to protect. As history professor and author Dr. Antoinette Lee explains in the journal American Studies International, preservation was part of the larger environmental reaction to the excesses of the post-World War II era, when massive public works projects caused enormous destruction of historic neighborhoods, architectural landmarks, and archaeological sites across the nation. She further relays that the gathering forces of the preservation movement peaked in 1966 with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. It was in this age of industry, this decade of development and destruction, that historic preservation rose to prominence, considering that it responded or happened as a result of excessive industrialization. We ought to take this warning to heart in modernity. It is a caution against celebrating technology to the point that we shun the beauty of the past. Though people often perceive preservation as simply saving historic structures, in reality, I like to think it falls into two main categories: preserving the tangible pieces of the past and representing the past through the art of imitation. Smithsonian writer Dr. Karen Wolf sheds light on this unique and eye-opening perception of preservation. We might think preservation is about stopping time, about freezing something in the past, but preservation today, as well as in the past, has always been about managing change. In order to effectively preserve history, we must recognize that change is inevitable. This motivates us to protect the past amid progress, to stand firm against the cloud of consumerism and save stories otherwise swallowed by the shadows. By fighting for preservation, we are forging a trail for generations after us to follow, a trail that reveals how the stories of today are molding and shaping the world of tomorrow. Throughout my speech today, I plan to discuss preservation in the early church, the significance of saving historic structures, the function of imitation in preservation, and what your role can be in preserving our past. Now, preservation is often restrained by chains of indifference, but truly it demands our attention due to its biblical significance and impact on the present day. Throughout the pages of Scripture, preservation is of utmost importance. In the Old Testament, the Lord calls the people of Israel to treasure the tales of his deliverance, passing them from generation to generation. But these accounts and teachings carry far beyond the days of old. In his letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul emphasizes how whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, so that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, you might have hope. By highlighting the significance of the Old Covenant writings in shaping the New Covenant, the Apostle Paul underlines the fundamental truth that the messages and morals of long ago do not diminish in value with the passage of time. This reality is one that the early church was quick to recognize as well. Due to the role of early church fathers in saving historic sites, we see their recognition that sharing the stories, saving historic sites, is instrumental in sharing the stories behind them. The anti-Christian government presiding over Rome at the time appears to have acknowledged this as well. Dr. Ralph Muncaster, the director of the Institute of Contemporary Christian Faith, outlines this fascinating reality in his book, Evidence for Jesus. So great was Rome's concern about the veneration of Jesus, he writes, that the Roman government often constructed statues of pagan gods over these Christian sites. However, this only served to mark the sites until persecution was stopped by Constantine. In his providence, the Lord guided the preservation of these early Christian sites, and we have a duty to ensure that it continues in this present day. Why would we not want to meditate on Christ's miraculous sacrifice by celebrating and saving the sites where scholars believe he was born and died and resurrected, not to idolize them? No, but to celebrate the stories that they share. These stories are far more important than any others because they unite to tell one tale, the tale of ultimate truth and everlasting life. But preservation is important for many more reasons than one and carries into far more spheres than one, so it is vital to consider its present-day application. At every turn, contemporary construction and urban planning pressure and persuade us to acknowledge the benefits of demolishing the old for the noble calling of the new. However, in the face of this ambition, a great evil can be committed: the destruction of historic sites, the demolition of places containing the only keys to unlocking our past. I have heard people practically describe this process of demolition and urbanization in a manner similar to that of renowned 21st century city planner Robert Moses. He explains that you cannot make an omelet or remake a city without breaking eggs. This notion of needing to break eggs to bring about a larger goal, creating a city where the ease of technology and the beauty of modern art and architecture is at the heart of everything, is admittedly at least a little attractive. Nonetheless, we cannot forget what these cracked eggs really are. They are not simply places of musty odors and rotting wood as many people perceive them. These are structures with stories, places where we can immerse ourselves in the past in a very tangible, meaningful way. The authors Stephanie Meeks and Kevin Murphy of The Past and Future City reference the example of a grocery store and handball court in the East Los Angeles neighborhood of Maravilla, and share the stories of the owners, Japanese immigrants to America after World War II, who moved to this particular location to start a new life after years in Minidoka, a Japanese internment camp in Idaho. The authors further relay that this 1920s handball court is now the oldest handball court in greater Los Angeles due to its preservation, the preservation of this sentimental structure. It was, and it is significant because of the story it shares. One of a life transformed by persistence in the face of hardship and injustice. If one building can boast of so many memories and such a sea of beautiful life lessons, think of how many stories we are eliminating when we support the demolition of an aging structure. Unfortunately, though, this drive for preservation often only becomes impassioned when a physical threat to a building's longevity arises. Why? Why do we wait until the situation seems hopeless? Why do we not rise up sooner? This was one point of discussion with Mr. Bill Dichtel, the executive director at Heritage Village Museum and Educational Center, a living history museum in Sharonville, for over a decade before his 2022 retirement. During our conversation, Mr. Dichtel laid out a theoretical scenario. A building was about to be demolished, and the people of the surrounding area began to protest. In reality, though, it's been there abandoned 10 years, he declared. Why now are you getting upset that they're going to tear it down? We should be more proactive. If there's a structure we want to save, let's get that in the works now and not wait till it's going to be demolished. This inspirational call for change, for proactivity, is vital in increasing our chances of success. These structures demand our attention, not a half-hearted disregard until the dramatic moment when their saving seems nearly impossible. Despite the grandeur of modern advancements in art and architecture and construction, we cannot overlook the intrinsic value of the past that is crushed every time a historic structure is demolished. This is an intrinsic value we must make more widely known to the world. In order to continue to effectively unlock the messages and morals remaining from prior decades, we must be willing to preserve statues and monuments remaining from prior decades. Before diving into this topic, though, I want to recognize that this is a sensitive issue. It is very likely the most contentious topic I discuss during my speech today due to its profound applicability in the present day. Consider a statue of Christopher Columbus or a monument of Robert E. Lee. Is it majestic or monstrous, treasure or trash? In answering any one of these questions, you are taking a stance, a heated stance. In order to understand arguments against preserving statues, we must recognize the history behind this. As Stanford history professor emeritus Donald McClacken relays, such statues were created by a group of women known as the United Daughters of the Confederacy, founded in the 1890s as black men were being disenfranchised and targeted by lynch mobs with increased frequency. They sought to celebrate the lost cause and its defense of white supremacy. These women were so adamant against black Americans being granted equal rights in society that they became avid supporters of the Ku Klux Klan and despised the United States' drive for desegregation. The establishment of hundreds of statues by this organization was unquestionably intended to solidify the roots behind white supremacy. Never can we expect monuments with such a painful past to be celebrated or even allowed to remain standing. By allowing them to remain in their original locations, we present a message of apathy and insensitivity toward races shunned by their establishment. The past several years have witnessed a rise in people's fighting for justice in the face of this evil. People are fighting, but are they fighting effectively? One account of a riot back in 2020 outside of the White House ought to call this into question. Photos from reporters on scene Monday night showed ropes slung around part of a statue of Andrew Jackson, the 7th U.S. president, as protesters pulled in an attempt to topple it. I recognize that there are emotional wounds pushing people to tear down statues. I recognize that such statues symbolize inequality and abuse when allowed to remain standing. However, I firmly believe that the incorporation of destruction and demolition into this campaign has been disgraceful and utterly uncalled for. You see, if we do not take the time to preserve these statues, think about all that we are losing just because a statue solidifies the reality of human fallenness. Can we truly forget it? Can we truly move on? This contentious issue was another point of discussion during my interview with Mr. Bill Dichtel. Referring to statues, Mr. Dichtel simply asserted that I'm for removing them and putting them in museums because there's still history there. Each statue tells a story. Each sheds light on a character, a culture, a worldview. Should we destroy a statue simply because it cements the reality of human fallenness? As Mr. Dichtel suggests, transporting statues highlights a conviction for preservation, but acknowledges the painful past that keeping them in their original locations seems to condone. Statues are central to history, our history, and by committing to preserve them in museums across the country, we are ultimately allowing this physical reminder of our past, whether sobering or uplifting, to be present for generations to come. But rather than restricting preservation to simply saving historic structures and monuments, we also must recognize that the past can be preserved through a historically grounded simulation of reality. Painting a picture of the lives and the legacies of the past, reenacting functions as a means of reliving and remembering history through this method of imitation. A study by the magazine Rethinking History sheds light on this beautiful reality. Reenactors characteristically possess the ambition to recreate life as it really was, and to establish for themselves or for an audience a connection between past and present. This link between then and now is invaluable, considering the role it plays in preserving the forgotten personalities and lifestyles of long ago. It is virtually impossible to dismiss the past as static or restrained to way back when we're standing in front of a reenactor. Sadly, though, reenacting has faced pushback over the past several decades, and many Americans have dismissed it as unrealistic or an ineffective method of preservation, going so far as to discount it. As author and historian Stacey Roth relays in her book, Past into Present, people opposed to preservation call it quixotical, misleading, incomplete, lopsided, rude, embarrassing, nostalgic, phony, too entertaining or theatrical, too shockingly unlike the present, or homogeneously too similar to the present. This reality that reenactors are imperfect, that reenactors each possess a unique level of past training, is one that we often forget. We cannot overlook the profound potential encapsulated in portrayals of historic battles, speeches, and momentous moments. By replicating the past, we are ultimately providing people in contemporary society with a window into providing a greater understanding of the events and characters of long ago. Despite criticisms for their inaccuracies, historic films are another invaluable asset to historic preservation. Now, for many of us, movies are simply a form of leisure, of near mindless relaxation. However, we cannot overlook the profound potential encapsulated in the visual imageries of films. Whether we're watching films for education or entertainment or somewhere in between, we must engage in what the authors of the journal Applied Cognitive Psychology refer to as detection exercise, deliberately increasing our awareness of the inaccuracies of the past. Despite the blunders of history-based films over the years, they are significant sources in helping people recognize the power of the past and the necessity of preservation. Here, in the 21st century, we are in an era when the beauty of the past will be swallowed in the present if we do not fight to preserve it now. Now, you must hear me when I say that history is around us. When was the last time you took the Beltway around Cincinnati or enjoyed a leisurely stroll through the downtown areas? Think about it. In these moments, you pass through centuries of development and ages of architectural prowess. Consider Fountain Square or Union Terminal. The Tyler Davidson Fountain of Fountain Square is a testament to late 1800s architectural style, intended to beautify the square and provide people and animals with fresh drinking water on days of horse and coach travel. Union Terminal, now known as the Cincinnati Museum Center, is also a window into technology, the advance of the railway system in early America. History, my friends, is truly alive, telling tales of heartbreak and hope, pain and promise. But you have steps to perform. You have the power to preserve history, and it begins with historic awareness. Support museums, recognizing that they are much more than simply places with plaques on the walls. Watch reenactments and engage, asking questions and diving deeper into the historic context of the time. History is being made today, just as it was a day or a year or a century ago. America is a country of transformation, and if we do not fight to preserve its precious history as it transpires, the days of old will be but a vapor, forever lost to the wind. History is a story, a beautiful story, to be treasured and told for generations. Do not let the past die. Support the history of old. Treasure your own life story. Preservation is a key to the past. Preservation is a key to the present. And with dedication and hard work, preservation can truly be a key to unlocking our future as well. Thank you.